Hi everyone, my name is Mohammed Sifki. I'm the AIA Mateo County Chapter President. I want to welcome you all to our May ARE study session. And today we are going to go over part 2 of programming and analysis. Next slide. We want to say thank you to our sponsors, Heather Young Architects, our ARE series sponsor, Ramik Engineers and MN Builders, our Gold Chapter sponsors, and Da Vinci Marble BKG Structural Engineers, our Silver Chapter sponsors. Next slide. Okay, session rules. These are the same from last session. Please mute yourself if you are not talking to reduce background noise, but feel free to unmute and ask questions at any time. Also, feel free to add questions to the chat bar below. Do not discuss any specific exam questions. It's not permitted by NCARB, and note that this session is being recorded. Next slide. Okay, a little bit about our VIP speaker, Diana Rangel. So Diana moved from Mexico back in 2011 to pursue her dream. She completed her master's in interior architecture from the Academy of Art University in San Francisco and started her career in residential design. After a few years, she wanted to experience what working in a large firm was and joined DS Architects and Engineers. Since then, she has been lucky to work on an ample variety of projects and expand her experience from interiors into architecture. She has completed 4 AREs to date, and she's excited about sharing her experience and help others complete their goals. Next slide. Okay, I will give it to Diana right now to excite us about climate zones and their relationship to building design.
Yep, well, thank you, Mohammed, for the introduction again. And thank you for everyone who is joining for the second part of this session, and whoever is joining for the first time, welcome. I'm just going to go over what we did in the first session. We did an introduction to the exam, and we covered the first topic, that was programming. And there is this session too, we are covering climate zones and the relationship to the building design, stormwater management, and additional tips that you should study. And we are going to close with questions and answers. And that doesn't mean you cannot interrupt me. If you have any question, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask me, or put your question in the chat box, and Mohammed is going to help me out reading any comments or questions. Okay, so with that, session topic number 2, I base myself studying the ARE 5 review manual from Ballast and O'Hara. And I also studied the Building Construction Illustrated book, the first chapter and section of it from Francis Ching. Okay, so what I'm going to cover right now is something that you should really know for the exam and study for. So what I have here on the left, it's a diagram of how the sun moves through the sky depending of the season and the time of the year. Okay, first of all, you can see the cardinal points for north, south, west, and east. And you see those loops with 3 positions for the sun. So the first position and the highest in the sky corresponds to summer or summer solstice. You should really know this date, June 21st. The middle height is the spring equinox or autumnal equinox, March 21st, September 22nd. And the third position of the sun, which is lower in the sky, is winter solstice or December 22nd. So why is this important? So if you see on your right, you see a section of a building, and where you have the summer sun and is higher in the sky, you're able to plan for the design of your building so you can allow natural light into the building, but not the heat. And you can see an overhang there that it doesn't allow that line, that dashed line coming from the summer sun, going inside the building. Versus winter sun, when you want the heat, it allows the lower sun go into the space. If you can see, the dashed line is going into the interior of the building. The second part that I want you to really understand is how to measure this. So we have the altitude, which is the angular elevation of the sun above the horizon. So horizon, just think about it as the flat surface, right? If you see on the right side, our flat surface or horizon is the ground. Then the altitude is measured with an angle from the ground to the dashed line of the sunlight. The second way of measuring the position of the sun is the azimuth. And this one is, instead of vertical, it's horizontal. And the way that is measured, it's always, or usually, always from south, following the clock, so clockwise. And there's always an angle right here. Now, this also affects the shape of the building, right? As we talked about, if it's summer sun, higher in the sky. So what works best to protect from the heat? Horizontal overhangs, right? You have windows and you put this overhang, you are making sure that the heat is not coming in summer, but you're allowing the heat coming into the building in the winter, right? And then what's the best solution for windows when you have winter sun? You can use vertical louvers like this diagram, and these diagrams come from the Chink's book as well. He has a lot of good diagrams that explain different applications for protection of windows and solar heat gain. These vertical louvers could be manually operated or could be controlled with time in an automatic system. So in addition to the position of the sun and how you get the heat gain, also that is really important about the protection and the shape of your building is where this building is located. And for that, there is a climate zone map. You see this is the United States. And if you see at the center, we have this break line that is kind of dividing the country into two sections. So on the left, we have the dry section, and on the right, we have the moist section. And within that, we have different climate zones. We have the cool zone that is mostly north of the United States, if you follow this wavy line. Then we have the temperate zone that is the middle part of the country. And then at the south is broken up into hot weather, which we have hot arid for the dry section, hot arid as deserts. And in the right bottom section, we have hot humid, like Florida, and we have all these swamps and all these cases. So for the exam, it's a good idea to know like basics of locations and maybe some important cities and where they are located and within which zone they are located. Okay, now we're going to give you some information about each region and how it affects the shape of the building. So the first one is the cool region. If you remember the map, that's the top of the United States. Their states are locations like Wyoming, Colorado. So in the exam, you say, oh, you have an architect has a project in Colorado. So you now know it's the cool region, right? So for cool regions, it's always best to minimize exposed surface area of the building. And this is to reduce the heat loss. So what is exposed area? So that means like smaller and taller buildings work better than longer buildings. This is because the smaller buildings keep the heat. They tend to not lose the heat that easily. So cubicle shapes are better. They could be partially built underground because when you do this, you're protecting from the winter wind. Northern exposure should be minimized because this is where usually the cold wind comes from. Large windows should be facing south when it's where we get the best solar exposure. Summer shading for glazed areas. This is what we talked about a few slides before, when we want to protect the building from the heat of the summer, but we want the heat of the winter. And use dark or medium colors for the building exterior. And this is because darker colors absorb heat, and for a cold weather, this is really helpful. Does anyone have any question about the cool regions? Okay. Now we're going to go to the second one, and most common, and this is where California falls, right? So this is middle of the United States, including the Northwest and Northeast. In this climate zone, the heat loss can be significant. Recommended to reduce northern exposure, again, because the cold wind comes from the north. Maximize the southern exposure, almost the same concept as the cool regions. We want the heat in the winter. The south, it can be protected, again, with overhangs on the buildings, but we can also use different strategies like using deciduous trees. So deciduous trees are the types of trees that lose their leaves during winter, but have leaves in the summer. So that means when we have sunlight, the heat can be blocked by the tree in the summer, but it cannot be allowed to be in the building in the winter because the trees don't have any leaves. Rectangular shapes are preferred, and medium colors for the exterior. We're going to get any questions for temperate regions? Okay. The next one is hot, humid regions. If you remember the map, it was southeast of the United States. I mean southwest, sorry. Hot, humid. No, it's actually southeast.
Southeast, that's correct. Yeah,
yeah, this is wrong. Southeast, like if you have a question, it will say, oh, an architect has a project in Florida. So you know it's a humid, right? So in this one, it's good to know that rarely only passive system building works at these locations. There's always usually HVAC system. But you're still trying to maximize the natural ventilation of the building. Therefore, like narrow floor plans work better, like in the diagram right here, because this allows cross ventilation through the space. Reduce the thermal mass or not use it. So thermal mass are all those materials that absorb heat during the day and release it during the night. And in this case, it is always hot and humid. We don't want any materials that absorb heat, right? Because it's going to make the people in the building really hot. High ceilings are better. Large openings are better. because they promote wind and circulation of the wind, provide shade for the openings, and use light colors for the exterior. And light colors because they reflect the light of the sun and the heat. The next one is hot arid regions. And these are regions of Southern California, desert, Texas. So if you think about all these locations, and if these locations are in the question in the exam, this is the climate zone that you need to think about. Use materials with high thermal mass, because in this one, we do want materials that absorb the heat during the day and release this heat during the night. Just think about Palm Springs, the desert, Las Vegas. It's really hot during the day, but at night it's chilly, right? Other solutions that help like this building shape are bodies of water. They can reduce the temperature through evaporation. So these bodies of water could be water fountains, pools, ponds. All these items help. You think about Palm Springs, a lot of houses and constructions have courtyard. So courtyard spaces help minimize openings. We don't want to allow more solar heat gain into the building. Provide shades for the openings. And again, use light colors for the exterior because the light colors reflect, right? Reflect this light. Okay. Any questions about the climate zones?
Yeah, I do have a question regarding courtyard. So something like a question like courtyard, it should be happen in the hot arid region or hot humid? I remember I have a question like if you have a courtyard, like if you have a water pump, my understanding is you shouldn't have that shouldn't happen in a hot humid. But is that courtyard or courtyard can apply both hot arid and hot humid?
Yeah, the hot humid, the courtyard helps for cross ventilation. Let's say if you have your courtyard and you have openings around, you go back to that image, like something like this, right?
Yeah.
So as long as it allows cross ventilation, this helps for hot humid. But for hot arid, it's usually surrounded with water. You don't really have cross ventilation when it's an arid climate zone.
You talk about the water, like water pump in the court, is help in the hot arid region.
Yes.
So
it doesn't help in the hot humid, right? Because it creates more moisture, and it becomes the temperature that it feels hotter, right? It's actually increase the temperature instead of helping cool it down.
Yeah, because that already is saturated with the humid, like with the
moisture.
Yeah, moisture. Okay, so courtyard can happen both hot, humid. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, so you're ready for the question time. Okay, let's see. So this question comes from the AIA handbook. It's just like something like this is going to be in the exam. So an owner has selected a hilly site for a new two-story residence. The site is located in a temperate climate with winter winds coming from the northwest and summer winds from the southwest. Which location on the site is a favorable microclimate for passive heating, cooling, and daylighting? Option 1, bottom of the north-facing slope. Option 2, bottom of the south-facing slope. And option 3, midway up the south-facing slope. And you should have seen a poll. Mohammed is going to help coordinate the answers.
Yeah, so we'll give 30 seconds for this one. We have 7, we have 28%, 32%. Temperate climates, winter winds.
I think there were some comments in the chat. For some reason, I cannot open it.
No, there are no questions.
Okay.
Okay, we'll give 10 more seconds. And polling. Let's see the results.
Okay, let's go and see the answer. Okay, 65% responded midway up the south-facing slope. Yeah, you're correct. Okay, so let's see why. Okay, the bottom of the slope would not be favorable due to cold air collection in the winter. Okay, so this is also really important to study. So when you have hills or slopes in the winter, usually the cold wind collects at the low point of any slope. So if you have this new house in a temperate climate and your winter wind is coming from northwest and summer wind coming from southwest, then what's the favorable microclimate? So we know that we don't want to be cold in winter. So the bottom of the slope is not the right answer. It will be way up, midway up on the south-facing slope. I know this is a little bit more confusing, but as long as you start studying all these different regions and try to link the different shapes and microclimates for each region, it will be easier for you to understand this type of questions. But there is a lot of content similar to this question. Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about climate zones?
I would just add, make sure to look at the map and where the states are, because in the question, they would give a question about the specific state. So you want to know if that state is, and they don't want to trick you. They're not going to give you like state in the middle where it'll be like, I know what is Nebraska. Is it north? Is it? It's going to be basically Florida, for example, for hot humid, Arizona for hot arid, California for the temper one, and then I think they use like either Colorado or Michigan or something like that for the cool environment. So just take a look at the map and make sure you have an idea of where states are located between these lines.
Yeah, it's usually common states. Yeah, they will not give you like maybe Texas, a state that falls between two zones or.
Yeah, Texas, for example, is kind of between two. Half of it is hot humid, half of it is hot arid. So they would not trick you with something like that, but it's very clear state. But just take a look at the states.
I think that also just the word facing north, facing is usually not preferable for any of the, that's sort of like if you're facing north, you're collecting snow, you're not melting off, so that's just sort of like, you see that, it's like possibly that's not where you want to be as one of the, ruling out an answer type of thing.
Correct, correct. Yeah, it feels like in all the climates you want to be facing south.
So,
Basically, wherever is your climate, you want to face south. Sometimes they maybe tell you that there is you want this room, maybe art studio, and you want indirect light. That's when you want to know that your windows has to be to the north because that's when you get the indirect sunlight. So it's things like that. And regardless really of the climate, north is when you get the indirect sunlight. So if you have a design studio with very, like you want to have indirect sunlight, that's you are going to place these big windows to the north side. Yeah.
correct. Mhm.
Anyone else has any other comments, questions before we move to another topic? Okay, I think Nancy, you can move to the.
Okay, good. So, third topic and last topic is the different stormwater management solutions. And for this one, I studied the site planning and design handbook. This was my main source of study, plus random videos in the internet explaining these concepts. So we're going to go through what is a retention basin, a detention basin, and an infiltration basin. What is a rain garden, what is a swale, and what are wetlands. Okay, so why stormwater management is important? Because in urban environments, we are replacing all these impervious surfaces as grass and vegetation with all the pervious with impervious, that is like asphalt, concrete. So all these materials that don't allow the water from storms to filtrate into the water table or into the earth, right? So the way to control this storm water is first one, to avoid saturation of the stormwater systems of the city. And second is to avoid pollutants to go through our bodies of water and damaging wildlife and also us in the future, right? So more impervious areas, more concrete parking lots, streets equals more water runoff, right? So these strategies help to regulate the water quantity into different systems. And some of these strategies help to remove some of the pollutants. And also these strategies help to replenish the water table. Okay, the first one is retention basin. So this is a little bit tricky. So what I want you to remember is a retention basin or retention pond is always wet, right? So retention comes from retaining. So retains the water, is always there, so always wet. So this one collects the storm water, and you can usually like see it as a part of a landscape. It looks beautiful. The water is there, and if it rains too much and the water is going to overflow for some reason, it has emergency spillways that allows that overflow to go into the city stormwater system. It loses water through evaporation and also infiltration into the earth towards the water table, and this becomes a really slow process, right?
Can I ask something?
Mm-hmm.
I think my comment is that retention basin is not always wet. The reason is that retention basins are there to collect your runoffs, but when it will be evaporated in such days, or let's say in a week or so. So it may not always be wet. The calculations for that is depending on the runoffs within the neighborhood. So every area or every property has different calculations, and they would specify specific retentions depending on how they divide runoffs. So, it's not always wet.
Okay, well, that comes from the book. But I can double check on that. But I think that comes from the book exactly.
I think retention pond is always permanent have water. When you have waterfall or rainfall, the pond going to flood, and then that portion, which extra portion of the water, during the rain, they're going to slowly penetrate into the infiltrate to the ground. But it should always have water in it.
Yeah.
Yes, because the one that dries is the next one, is the tension. So retention is always wet. That's why the way that I learned about this one is because of the name, right? Retains. So always retains water.
And I have a comment on the previous slide regarding the water. Your previous slide before this, I think one reason why they have that stormwater management, it's so in urban areas so that there won't be a surge of flooding. That's why they need to hold it before they actually release it slowly. It's actually a building code, local code on most of the major cities like San Francisco, New York, Chicago. And so buildings actually need to have tanks so that they need to have, or stormwater management to hold those water in their buildings if they don't have any enough land.
Yes, so that's why these strategies hold the water, right? If it's the retention pond, it holds the water there. And I'm going to explain the other ones. But that's, yeah, the main purpose is not to overflow, saturate the stormwater system. But the second one is also help removing the pollutants that come from these impervious areas. Let's say it's a parking lot and there's a lot of cars parked there. There's oil, right? So when it rains, all this oil is coming with the water. So there should be a system that helps to remove the oil before it goes actually into the water system of the city. So yes. Anyone else?
So just before we move from the retention, if you go back to the next slide. Yeah, so just so no one get confused, the retention, if you just go to the next slide, I don't see the next slide. Yeah, no, the retention pond. So it's always wet, just so for the sake of the exam, so no one, I know that sometimes different counties give different names or whatever, is that pond or water body, but retention from the name, it's retain the water. The water, for the sake of the exam, the water has always to stay in the retention pond. It's retaining the water is there all the time. The next one that Diana is going to explain is the different one, but this one, again, for the sake of the exam, when you hear retention basin, retention pond, the water is always there. It's not just collecting and then putting in the soil.
Yeah, and I just want you to make sure like all the tips that I'm sharing with you right now are for the sake of the exam. I know like it changes from city to city, county, and authority having jurisdiction, but for the exam,
yeah,
so this is
different counties, different. They have different names. They name the thing in real life differently, but just so I'm confused for the exam. So
different planners.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I see that like Nilüfer is saying, I would suggest to keep real life experience out of the door when you are taking the exam, because that's really important. NCARB have these rules, they are taken from the book. So just look at the book, stick to it, even if you heard something different with a planner or the, a plan checker or a city planner.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Can you
And
show
with
the,
that, sorry?
can you show the book again that you were gathering a lot
Ah,
of
Yep.
information
the
one
first
more
one.
time?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So now let's talk about the dry detention basin. So this one doesn't mean it's always dry, but it's usually dry, right? It only fills with water when it rains. This one has a system of overflow at the bottom. It's designed to mimic the stormwater flow that existed in the site before any development. And this one delays the stormwater release. So as Eric was saying earlier, like these strategies help. So all the water is not discharged into the system at the same time, and then it causes overflow and floodings. But this one actually allows to gradually release the stormwater. So here I want to share one tip that I found like really useful for the exam. Whenever you find questions or case studies or anything that is talking about when they give you the option of maintaining the natural stormwater flow pattern of the site or create one, you are always going to go and choose the natural one because natural flow is always better than a created flow. It doesn't matter if you do like the perfect stormwater management plan. The existing pattern of the site is always going to be the best option.
Yeah,
Okay, the third one.
if I can just add to that one, whenever you get questions
Yes.
talks about cut and fill to your soil, always try to choose the answer where it either has no cut and fill, you are just using the same natural ground, or you are making the minimum amount of cut and fill, because that's one of the other things they want to make sure you would do as an architect. You are not going to change the geography and the topography of your site. You're actually going to work with the site when you design.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the less you touch a site, the better. So if you want, if you can keep the natural flow, good. If you need to modify it, then you need to do the cut and fill and do the less of that as possible. So always try to keep the natural untouched site as a first option. Okay, and I wanted to jump to this one, infiltration basin, because it's really similar to detention basin. They look similar, they're usually dry, and the only difference is for infiltration basin, you usually have a pore space. That means you use like materials like a stone versus landscaping. And this one uses the pores of the soil to filter the water. And with this infiltration basin, you can cover larger surfaces, larger areas, and all the storm water that comes to these areas come as a sheet flow. So what does a sheet flow mean? Just think about like a sheet of paper, right? It's just flat. Just think about the water is moving evenly and flat. That's the way that it arrives to the site. It doesn't arrive like strong, it's just like soft, even. So that's sheet flow. Okay, so those are the three basins. And I'm going to talk about rain garden. So rain garden is also called bioretention and is the one that we mostly use, or at least I mostly use in my projects. This one is the most effective to remove pollutants, like 90%. And this is because it has a different type of vegetation that grows here and helps infiltrating the water. It's usually used for shallow areas, so they are not really deep. They hold the rainwater until it's absorbed into the soil. It increases the infiltration because we have more natural elements on it. And usually the water soaks into the soil within 24 hours, but it's usually designed to be consumed within 3 days. And we see a lot of these ones in projects and around the Bay Area. And I work with a lot of projects in Menlo Park. And so this is usually what you see like at the front of new buildings. And it has the vegetation. And well, in this picture, we have a duck there, but usually it looks like this. Any questions about this one?
So this is not, it's made to look natural, but I mean, they've imported probably the soil to get that optimal 3-day, it's designed soil, engineered soil, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually the civil engineer is the one who plans for this one, and they do the calculations of the pervious versus impervious areas for each site, and based on that, they determine the size that the bioretention need to be. Okay, so what is a swale? So a swale, just think about that it moves the water. So a swale is landscaped area that can help to move the water from one place to another. Right? This is mostly used in parking lots, like in the picture. You can have it in islands, meridians. The vegetation in these locations also helps with the infiltration and removal of pollutants as car oil, like sediments, bacteria, heavy metal. And as it moves water from one side to the other, it moves all this stormwater from the parking lot into the stormwater system or into a bioretention, which it will help even more to reduce, to remove the pollutants from the water. It reduces the runoff velocity, so the water is not discharged that fast. This one is easy to maintain, and we can see it a lot now, used around also the Bay Area. So whenever you see like an application that you need to take water from one place to another, it's a swale. Okay, any questions for this one?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Bioretention, you talked about retention base, but what's the difference between that, or what specifically is bioretention?
The bioretention is to remove pollutants. Like the most, the thing that you use it the most is to remove the pollutants. It's usually used when you have a lot of impervious area, like parking lots, or a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt. So all that water needs to be treated or pre-treated. Try to remove as much pollutants as possible. And the water filtrates into the soil.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the retention, does that mean, so bioretention is remove the metal, heavy metals pollution out of the stormwater, and the retention is they hold the rainfall, hold the water and let it slower penetrate into the soil.
Correct.
Okay, so I mean, is it, so look at the picture here, is it means rain garden always wet compared with the swale?
No, rain garden is not always wet. Let's say it rains, there will be water there. So the water is going to soak into the soil. Then let's say in the next 2 weeks, it didn't rain, it's going to dry. It's going to dry out.
So so the swell which is happening in parking lot, usually, what about the rain garden? Where usually people put the rain garden?
So rain gardens for our projects are usually like they have a designated area in the site. Sometimes it's at the front of the building, like in this application, next to the right of way, or some other times at the back of the properties. But usually there's preference to have it at the front of the buildings because they look beautiful, right? They look like vegetation. But it really depends. I think it really depends on your site, where you can have it. Because the topography of your site also matters, right? Where the water is going to be flowing from. Yeah, but I think that's too many details for the exam itself. As long as you study the description of each one and you know the difference between them, you are able to select which will be the best option for your site. But you don't have to calculate how big it needs to be or what's the best location for it. It's mostly like you have this condition, so what is the best solution for your water?
Gotcha.
You should know how to read a topo. You shouldn't, understand it, how to read a topo if you don't.
Yes.
And I'm looking on Google, actually, ESLA, which is the Organization for Landscape Architects, they do have, I just wrote bioretention versus bioswale. And they do have their comparison, like bioswales, it says it's either wet or dry, made of grass, rocks, other types of vegetation, must be sloped to move water through the system in an efficient manner. Bioretention ponds are depressed, vegetated areas that capture and store stormwater runoff and can work in combination with bioswales. So they really work together in combination, but there is this difference between the two.
Yes.
If you just write it actually on Google, bioretention versus bioswale, ESLA, they do have a comparison between the two.
So also, yeah, just think about this one. Bioretention treats the water, swale moves the water. I think that's the simpler way to differentiate both.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So we can talk about the last point about water. So what's a wetland? So wetland is a natural environment. It could have, sometimes it has water, sometimes it doesn't, but it has vegetation. So the vegetation that grows here can grow in both conditions. This is a great deal for the exam and on our world of architecture. We want to protect them as much as possible because they hold wildlife. And there's an estimated that like 43% of the endangered species, they rely directly or indirectly on the wetlands, right? For example, for bird breeding. And the 3 following points are something that I want you to remember. So all the wetlands are mapped by the Department of Interior. They're protected by the Corps of Engineers. And there are different restrictions on sites related to wetlands. For example, if you have a site and a portion of the site is a wetland, then that means you cannot build in that portion of the site. And let's say you have a site and your stormwater needs to be released or partially released in the wetlands, then you should contact the Corps of Engineers to be able to have a permit to do that. So if you need to send your stormwater to the wetland, you need to make sure to remove the pollutants and protect the wetlands as much as possible. Okay. Any questions about the wetlands? We actually have wetlands close to Menlo Park, right? I know because our office in Redwood City is close by. So I was always remembering about this area when I was studying for the exam.
Yeah, and when you cross Dumbarton Bridge, on the other side, that's all wetlands.
What wetlands?
Yeah.
So yeah, protected area, and sometimes dry, sometimes wet. Okay. Okay, and this is the last topic that I have for stormwater. The following slides are just some tips about other content. And I'm just going to go quickly through them because we're running out of time.
Oh, Diana, can I ask if, since we discussed about wetland, is there a topic regarding riparian? Is there a topic about that?
Not in this session.
But
Is that what you're asking, or?
Is it going to be part of the exam?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yes, so that's good to know. All these riparian areas are all the natural areas next to like rivers or creeks. And there are different dimensions that you need to know. And they are covered in the site planning book that I'm recommending. It has a section about the riparian zones.
Thank you.
Okay, so as you know, the exam format changed and we now have less questions than before. But something I just want you to make you aware and that you know, our optional break is longer now. But that means if you decide to take a break when the day of your exam, that means any item to you that you viewed or answered gets logged. For example, you saw a question, but you didn't answer it, and you just flag it. If you choose your break, when you come back from your break, you cannot see those questions anymore. So I recommend you to plan ahead and maybe plan for a break at the middle of your exam if you really want to take one. And let's say if you reach, I don't know, question number 45, okay, you know that you're going to stop and go back to your questions before you hit the break button.
So that now applies to Prometric centers too?
Yes, to both.
And they even reduced the amount of questions on Prometric too?
Yes, it's the same exam.
It is the same because they had it was different at first. So now
it's the same. Yeah, you either take it at home or in the center, it's the same. Yeah, you cannot just go. For example, if you reach the point of your case studies, you see the first question, then that means when you come back, you cannot answer that anymore. But I don't know if that's beneficial for you, if you like read the case study first and then go to your break. Well, that's up to you. But I did plan it just to allow myself 1 hour for the 2 case studies. And I did plan for a break.
I did, because when I took PA recently, they had to, you could still just take a break whenever, and the questions were still there when you came back from Prometric. But if you took it online, then there were apparently less questions, and you had, so there was a difference in the exams. And they did some sort of, so they waited, took me almost 4 weeks before they gave me a result.
Oh, I was able to get it right away.
Yeah, but not, they were in a transition. So there was a difference between the way they did it at Prometric and the way they did it online. And they actually, I think that they have a different curve, or maybe they're matching it now. Maybe at Prometric, I hadn't received an email, or maybe I didn't read through it, that they had changed but there were two. If you did it at Prometric, you could take a break anytime and you came back and the questions were still there. But if you did it online, then it's this way that you're showing.
Not anymore. I did it at Prometrics, and this was the way that it was. I did it at the end of February.
Yeah, I did mine at the end of January.
So I think now both online and on-site, this is the exam format. So I just want you to be aware,
Okay.
yeah, that the items that you see, even if you didn't answer them, you don't have access to them anymore. And I did take my break and I did check and I didn't have access to them. So
Good to
be
know.
aware.
Good to know.
And okay, so just quickly, other content to know, accessibility and important dimensions like railing heights, door clearances, ramp slopes. You can study these dimensions from the standards. These are available online, and as well the IBC that is available online. And just make sure to study IBC and not CBC, because the exam focuses on the IBC. Make sure you know the difference between zoning and building code. Okay, do we have time for this one, Mohammed?
Yeah, we have a few more minutes.
Okay. So this question follows my previous statement. Know the difference between zoning and building code. And this also comes from the handbook. And it goes like this: setback rules, as prescribed by a zoning ordinance, can accomplish which of the following? Check the three that apply. Prescribe adjacent building uses, ensure availability of light and air circulation, establish a minimal degree of privacy, establish building exterior wall construction, minimize floor area ratio, provide a space for maintenance of building exteriors. And you should see the pop-up for the full answer.
So we'll give 30 seconds for this one. And it's, again, this is more than one choice. It says check the three that apply. So you need to check 3 of them.
You have 20 seconds. Isn't that what it is? Calculates out to like 20 seconds per question, or
it's actually 1 minute per question.
1 minute, yeah.
It's 1 minute per question. You want to keep it under 1 minute, just to give yourself some time for the case studies, because they take more time. But we used to go back to the general questions that, like, and many of them, if anything that takes more than 1 minute, I would just pick any answer and mark it. But it looked like now you cannot go back to them if you take your break. Yeah, I usually used to leave them all the way to the end, questions that need calculations or take more time. So I see that we have 75% voted, 78%. We'll end this in another 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3. Okay, so
Okay.
looks like all the choices have been made.
Okay, I think we can just go through
The answer.
the answers. Yes. So happy faces. Ensure availability of light for air and circulation. Establish a minimal degree of privacy. and provide a space for maintenance of exterior buildings. What prescribes adjacent building uses? It's not usually sunny. Wait. Okay, so these are the accomplishments of zoning. The building exterior wall construction is usually dictated by building code, and the intention to minimize floor area ratio. Something is weird here. Okay, setbacks ensure access to air and light, provide building privacy, and provide a space to perform building maintenance. Zoning ordinances typically address floor area ratio, adjacent building uses, and exterior wall construction. However, these are not accomplished through the implementation of setback rules. Okay, so we need to read the question carefully. So the question starts with setback rules, right? So what a setback does, not exactly what the zoning does or covers. So we do have the uses of the different buildings and zoning uses, but a setback doesn't tell you what the adjacent building needs to be, right? A setback allows you to have light and circulation, allows you to have privacy, and a setback allows you maintenance of building exteriors. So need to read the questions carefully. In this case, it was throwing us off by zoning ordinance, but we actually need to focus on setback rules.
Yeah, and I also think the setback rule probably will tell you the maximum floor area ratio, not minimum.
It's not really related to the floor area ratio. The FAR has nothing to do with setback.
Well, I guess it depends, right? Depending on the size of your site and how much setback you have, that's how much floor area you could have. Right?
Yeah, it will affect it. Like a high rise, they have a setback and you have to go up and step it back. So it's going to affect the FAR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when this point is the maximum floor area, correct, not the minimum. Okay. And just one more slide of more content to know. Study the types of soils. Study what environmental site assessment phase 1 and phase 2 are. What are the mitigation strategies for contaminated soils? What are slopes? What are the percentage of the slopes? And how to calculate slopes? The difference between preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. And know the different streets, like local street, collector, arterial, and expressway. And all of these are all different topics that we can take different sessions to cover. But at least if you take a note of this and you can focus on them in your studies, this will really help you. Okay, and with that, does anyone have any questions?
I have a last question. Sorry, I have so many questions. I heard the bubble diagram, the programming diagram is really important for PA, but I'm struggling. I don't know where I can find more, puzzle diagram, the puzzle quiz to practice. Do you have an idea when you study PA?
What did I do for that one? I think I studied the
ballast has a little bit in it, I think.
Oh, okay.
Let me go back to the beginning.
Yeah, but there is like relationships to rooms and uses and they usually give you something about here's some property and how do these areas relate to each other. And you have to sort of put them in the most logical
Yeah,
arrange.
so yes. So they will give you the bubble diagrams and they will give you some descriptions and you need to complete the diagrams. What I did, I studied first from this book, and I think the best way that you can do exercises probably just, yeah, this will sound like really weird, but maybe just Google them, like some diagrams, try to read through them. And if you don't understand the connection, maybe can ask around, or you can ask me as well. I'm going to leave my email contact information. But I also relied most of my knowledge for this into what I studied for school. And when I did my thesis project, where we had to create these bubble diagrams and adjacency diagrams, that's the way I remember them.
In the comment section, I see walking the AR is a great resource for PA.
Great.
So,
You too.
Oh yes, this is a great one. I really recommend doing this one. It's a practice exam. I think it's like 90 questions. But I recommend doing it after you have a general sense of knowledge, because it's a high difficulty exam. It's really close to the real exam. And I think you should have the terms already studied and an idea like closer to if you were taking actually the real exam. So this practice exam will help you to know where you are and what you should study after. I would not take it if you're just starting to study, because it's not going to really help you a lot. So you should have some knowledge before taking this practice exam.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else has questions? Well, since we have some more comments. So I'm going to put my email in the chat box.
So what test has been the hardest for you so far?
PA. Yes. Yes, PA. And I relied a lot on my work experience, because I do a lot of feasibility studies. So I have to deal with bioretention, zoning, and all these items. And it's still, I think the hardest part for me was how to read topography maps. Not just read them, but calculate slopes. That's why I say it's really important to calculate slopes from topography maps.
and I see some YouTube link to YouTube videos in the chat, so that's good resources for. I think Cynthia added these ones for programming and analysis, practice management, PJM, PPD, CNE. So make sure to copy these ones before we end. Any last questions before we end for today?
Oh, I was just going to say those videos were shared from the USC architecture chair. So those are free videos. It's very, I saw one of them and she explains everything very clearly. So I also would recommend that you watch it. It's not long, it's only 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining, and just keep it up. Good luck with your studies and your exams.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Diana, for really good 2 presentations about PA. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Good job.
Okay, see you in the next
Thank
one.
you, Diana.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.